For a while now, I've been wanting a bike with drop bars and skinnier tires. Something that rolls better on pavement compared to my ATVs and mountain bikes. So late last year, I modified my old Surly 1x1 to be a sort of test bike for my next frame building project. In this video, I'll go over how I use that bike as a starting point to design myself a gravel bike. While most of my bikes have some sort of flat bars, I like drop bars, especially for longer pavement rides. I'm not a big distance rider, but I do want a bike that I can grab and go do 50 or 60 miles. And I want something more efficient than an ATV. There are over 100 miles of off-street bike paths within the city limits of Minneapolis. Combine that with St. Paul and the suburbs, and we have a huge network of paved and crushed limestone trails. Not to mention all the railroad gravel, sandy river trails, neighborhood cuts, and bandit trails. And that's what I want this bike for. Longer rides, mostly on pavement, but with some dirt and gravel mixed in. I rarely venture out far enough to actually ride long stretches of gravel, so part of me doesn't even want to call this a gravel bike. When I look at the current selection of so-called gravel bikes, there's a really wide range. Everything from long, slack, mountain bike-inspired adventure bikes to short and steep road bike-inspired gravel race bikes. Finding my personal sweet spot within that spectrum has been kind of tricky. It's easy to get pulled toward a fast, road-orientated design, especially since it's been years since I've had anything that resembled a road bike. But then when I think of the rides I typically do, I feel I'm going to want it to handle well in the dirt. So that makes me lean toward a drop-bar mountain bike. What I keep telling myself is that I'm not trying to make the one bike that can do everything. I have other bikes, including a couple ATVs. So I think that it's okay that this bike is a bit more focused on pavement. I just need to make sure it's not a complete dud in the dirt. Gravel bike, road plus, drop bar ATV. I'm not sure what to call it, but I know what it isn't. It's not a race bike or an expedition bike. It's just a bike designed to go on nice long rides around town on a variety of terrain. I've tried to build up bikes like this before, going back to 2009 and my old Trek road bike, converted to single speed with cross tires and flared shallow drop bars. Later on, I tried it with my Gen 1 Fargo, but I really didn't like the way the Fargo handled with skinny tires. The Fargo definitely works best with big tires. Which brings me to this project, my first drop bar bike build. I'm pretty good with mountain bike and ATV geometries, but I just don't have the experience to know a good starting point for a drop bar bike. So that's where my Surly 1x1 came in. It was the closest thing I had to gravel bike geometry. So I added some drop bars and built it up the best I could. And it didn't turn out half bad. The geometry is fairly close to a Sklar Super something or a Crust Bombora, but with a higher bottom bracket. I've been on a handful of 25 plus mile rides, and I've been happy with it. And that's often how I design a frame. I take an existing bike I own and make tweaks to the numbers based on the changes I want. So I took the measurements of my Surly 1x1 conversion, put them into BikeCAD, and this became my starting point for my new design. Once everything was plugged in, I could start tweaking the numbers. I kept the seat angle similar to the 1x1 at 73 degrees, but I increased the head tube angle to 72. Obviously, I lengthened the head tube and increased the bottom bracket drop. I increased the seat tube length to get a more horizontal top tube. Then I lengthened the chainstays and the front center. These changes got it a bit closer to a more traditional gravel bike geometry. I'm planning to run a dropper, so I added it into BikeCAD so I could make sure I had enough space. I ended up buying a Surly straggler fork for this project, which has an axle to crown length of 400 millimeters with 44 millimeters of offset. I want the frame to have clearance for a 2.1 tire or so, but my plan is to run either a 42 millimeter knobby or a 50 millimeter slick. And because of the longer head tube, I can run a normal stem. I increased the front center to add some more length to the cockpit and get the seat post to handlebar length similar to my Surly. I also made the chainstays a little bit longer for some extra tire clearance. I'm probably going to run a 44 millimeter head tube just in case I ever want to add a carbon fork with a tapered steer. I ended up increasing the bottom bracket height 5 millimeters. I actually kind of like the way the Surly feels, and it only has 43 millimeters of bottom bracket drop. Here I'm adding the tube diameters for the front triangle. I'm planning to use a 35 millimeter down tube, 35 millimeter seat tube, and a 31.8 top tube. I went back and forth between a 71.5 and a 72 head angle, but I finally settled on 72. Then I changed the dropouts to Paragon Machine Works low mount dropouts and started to double check numbers. That's when I realized I reversed a couple numbers in the seat height. Instead of 875, it should be 857. Because of the lower saddle, I needed to shorten the seat tube to 62 centimeters to have clearance for the dropper. I might even drop it down to 61 just for some added leeway. Then I switched back to a 50 millimeter tire. And there it is, my current plan for a gravel bike. Then I took those numbers and added my frame in Bike Insights so I could compare it to my modified Surly 1x1 and some production frames. Of the production gravel bikes I compared it to, it was closest to the Canyon Grail, which makes me a little worried because it's a pretty racy bike. But I'm guessing a lot of that racy feel is going to come from the light carbon frame and carbon wheels. I doubt my steel frame with heavy wheels is going to ride like a race bike. And here it is compared to a Santa Cruz Stigmata, a Crust Scapegoat, a Specialized Crux, and lastly, a Surly Midnight Special. The reach on my frame is about 60 millimeters longer than the Midnight Special, but the Surly comes with a 120 millimeter stem, and I'm planning on about a 60 millimeter stem, so the handlebar to seat post distances are actually pretty similar. I have a bike fit scheduled in a couple weeks, which will be my first bike fit ever. I figured it was a good idea since I don't have as much experience with drop bar bikes. I think my current plan is in the ballpark, but I'm guessing that I'll be adjusting some numbers after my fit. Obviously, I'm not an expert frame builder, so getting to design, build, and test another bike is a great learning opportunity, no matter how it turns out. This is especially true for this project, being that it's my first drop bar bike. In the next video, I'll talk in more detail about how I chose the frame tubes, along with the dropouts and brazons I'm planning to use. I'll also discuss any tweaks I've made to the design after my bike fit. If you want to see how the rest of the build goes, be sure and hit the like and subscribe buttons so you'll see the next video when it's published. If you're enjoying this video series, consider a super thanks. And if you haven't watched my other videos, go check them out. Thanks for watching, take care, see you next time.